Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Winning Momentum podcast with your host. That's me, Scott Sinclair. I'm excited today. I have a special guest with me, but before we start that, the Winning Momentum podcast today is brought to you by roofersworld.com, ROOFS World, WORLD.com, and their ladder mount product. Hey, Laura, do you ever climb ladders?
Do I ever climb ladders? I try not to.
Extension ladder? Yeah. Well, this is why you try not to, because they're unsafe. You know, a crazy amount of people in the U.S. try to put lights on their house or clean their gutters, and they end up in the hospital. Don't hold me to the number, but like 600,000 a year. It's crazy, the number. And this little product here from Roofer's World sits on your gutter, so it protects the gutter and it stabilizes your ladder. For $39.99. Why would you not own that product? Right?
I love that.
Roofersworld.com. Go and order one, and you can also find it in your favorite do-it-yourself stores like Home Depot and Lowe's and those sorts of home hardware in Canada. I believe. Don't hold me to that. Just go to roofersworld.com. That's the right way to go. I want to introduce an exciting guest today, Laura Stewart, and Laura is the founder of From the Ground Up Media. Do you go with that, or do you go with the acronym?
We go with the acronym. We want to be cool because From the Ground Up is way too long. So we shortened it to FTGU, which we say FTGU Media. So no one knows what we mean, and we like that. Then we get an opportunity to explain it.
Right. The no vowels name for the company. It's a full-service media squad helping real estate agents showcase through content their personal brand. Laura is able to reverse engineer what agents are looking for. Because she herself is a real estate agent. Where are you an agent? Are you in Toronto?
I am in Toronto, yeah.
I did see you went to Schulich, but I didn't actually look for where your office is.
And, I'm actually here at the Shops at Don Mills, which is like the East End kind of Toronto, and I've been doing this for 8 years now. The real estate, not the media, the real estate.
Yeah. After a very short period of time, about 6 years, Laura was promoted to vice president of Royal LePage. Is that correct?
I wish. No, of our real estate brokerage. So
of your brokerage within.
Yeah, so we have like a
Royal
team within a brokerage.
Yeah.
We have 54 agents on our team, and so I help run sort of all the behind the scenes, everything that has to be done to run the team, along with actually doing my own sales as well.
Right. That's actually what I meant. I expressed that poorly. And then there's a stat here that I don't really understand. And you help over 700 buyers, sellers, and investors every single year. You're involved in 700 transactions? Or what does that mean?
Me exactly? Really in the team that I run. So I personally probably do just over 200 every year. Me personally, because I do mostly new build and pre-construction condos. So I can do a lot of that from the office, which is great because I don't have to be going on listing appointments and showings and things like that. But the team at large does around, that probably is a bit of an old stat. I think we got over 800 last year.
So the new build and the condos are largely investors. Is that correct?
Yes, for the most part.
Speculative.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I would say 80% of all of our buyers are investors.
Right.
What they particularly like about pre-construction condos is they don't need to get a mortgage today. So it helps a lot of people get their foot in the door for like their first income property, where they can pay the deposits down over the course of a couple years and then kind of get all their ducks in a row to get a mortgage at a later date. Sometimes they'll sell it or like flip the paperwork, which is called an assignment. But I would say the majority of my guys, we actually kind of educate them and teach them like you really should close on these properties if you can. Because if you think you've made some money over the last 3 years, just wait another 10 years and see what happens.
Are we worried about inflation, supply chain for the builders, price per square foot going up? Listen, we had you probably don't know much about my podcast or me before we connected on this, but I work a lot with right. I work a lot with troubled companies and turning businesses around, and so I come from that community. I come from where you are on Bay Street, mostly, although I've worked in 27 countries in the last maybe 20 years. and maybe over 30 countries. Anyways, I lose count of that, and it doesn't matter. The point is, I pay attention to insolvencies and turnarounds and things that are in trouble. And the hot topic right now in your city in particular is exactly that. It's exactly speculative buying on condos. And then what the builders are doing is they're waking up one morning and they're realizing that they sold these condos at a price per square foot that gives them no margin in the modern world, right? Because things have changed in the last 6 to 12 months. And so they're bankrupting them and flipping out the projects. And it's, then you think, well, a person like me, I don't know about you from your financial acumen, but a person like me thinks, well, okay, who gets hurt in that, right? Who's being restructured? And the answer is the people that put down the deposits on the, on the speculation, because they're the unsecureds. And so, it worries me. It worries me because on the social media side, when you're talking to young people, one of the things that everybody's selling is exactly that product, right? They're pushing real estate, cash flow, investment. And I just wonder if these worlds are going to collide.
I think that this is a great topic of conversation. Like just last year, we had a project up in Vaughan cancel, and it made all of the news and all of the headlines. And fortunately for me, I didn't have any clients in that project, but unfortunately for the people who did, regardless if you're an investor or an end user, I mean, it's devastating when something like that happens, because although you do get your money back, so thankfully you should be getting all your deposits back because they're held in a trust account. So the developer doesn't really ever actually get your money, but they're held in a lawyer's trust account. So you'll get your money back, but you've lost the opportunity for that money to make you any money, right? And that's really what the unfortunate part with that is. I think no matter what, when you're investing in anything, there's always an element of risk. And unfortunately, when it comes to new build pre-construction condos, that is the risk, that the developer doesn't end up going through with the project. Those handful of projects, they make a lot of splash in the news and all the headlines. They don't actually happen all that often. Last year, we had one of our highest years of actually completing condo units. And so developers are completing these buildings. Obviously, we're seeing the cranes in the sky. Things are happening. And so I always just say,
if real estate values are going up, there's no reason to ever have this problem if you're a developer, right? Because even if you suck as a developer, you could just flip this to the next fellow or woman coming along as a developer. And then the investor is fine. But you just wonder if things stagnate, interest rates are starting to rise, right? Because they're leveraging the build of this thing, and their costs of materials and labor have skyrocketed. I just think it's going to be a problem. But to bring that full circle, all the more reason to work through somebody like you, because the builders, the developers, and who's stable and reputable and who's not.
I always say to my clients, let's not be the guinea pig in this. If there's a developer and they're new and they've only done one-off commercial spaces, maybe we shouldn't be working with them, or at least know what your risk is going into something. But when we're talking about the Tridells of the world, they've been around so long, they might actually take a hit on a project and build it anyways, just because they don't want that bad reputation and bad publicity. Your investors tend to be multi-transactional, right? So if you buy a pre-construction project with a developer today and everything goes smoothly, they will be your customer again in the future. And I think the good developers know that. And so one of the things I always say is look at who the developer is. Have they completed units in the past? How many projects? Did they say what they were going to do when they were going to do it? Did they complete it on time? And that kind of gives you a better sense of whether or not this particular project will get completed. But one more point, Scott, that I think is important to notice, to note, when you're actually signing for the agreement of purchase and sale, right on the front of your new build condo agreement, it will say whether or not the developer has zoning and permits in place yet. And I always say, you want to make sure that that's in place, because that's where the biggest amount of time gets wasted. So if a developer doesn't have zoning, they can't start building yet. And if that process takes another 2 years, well, guess what? Things have gone up in price. Labor costs go up, supply chain issues, everything becomes more expensive. And then so the developer's like, well, you know what? Maybe we just cancel the project and resell it under a different name at that time. But if they
Yeah.
have the zoning in place up front, chances are they're ready to move forward as quickly as possible.
Let's continue on with your bio here in the introduction. FTGU Media, so a personal media squad, we help real estate agents become celebrities within their database. I like that expression, resulting in easier sales and ultimately more deals consistently. So I think we're going to talk about that a lot today. That's sort of been my focus. We start by sitting down with you to discuss what your goals are and to gain a better understanding of who you are and what you love to do outside of real estate. And I'm going to assume that is part of creating the personal brand, is bringing some authenticity and some humanity to, and not just selling, right? To, provide a story and a journey. So we'll get into that. But let's start, Laura, with some background on you and your journey. How did you get from there to here? And I think that'll be a good start for us.
Yeah, that's great. So I, as I mentioned, I started in real estate 8 years ago. After doing my MBA at Schulich, I really liked the idea of being able to kind of be a quasi entrepreneur. I mean, not all real estate agents are entrepreneurial per se, but there is an element of running your own business, creating your own brand, having a strategy and a brand plan that I thought my MBA could really help me with. In doing so, I joined a team called REC Canada, which was run by two gentlemen, Jazz Takar and Simeon Popalius, who still own the team. And they wanted to really start to grow things and figure out a way that they could scale their team. And so I kind of came on board just to help them with organizing things, creating systems, like what can we do in our process that we're already doing, but what can we delegate to other people? Does a real estate agent always need to be doing every single task in the process? Or can we have an admin person do it? Or can we have an inside salesperson be calling? And so we really mapped everything out and found as many efficiencies as we could. Once we kind of gathered that together, my colleague Jazz said, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And this is back in 2018, early 2018, when here in Canada, I mean, podcasts certainly weren't what they are today. I think the US, they're always a little bit ahead. So I think 2018, they were already well underway. But I said, what's a podcast? Like, I don't even know what this is. Let's do it. I am not a tech savvy person. And somehow I got thrown into the lion's den, and I was the one doing the video recordings and fixing the audio and getting it up on Libsyn and wherever people listen to podcasts. Like, I figured that all out simply by watching YouTube videos. And the reason we started the podcast really was to be able to give our clients education, information on how to invest in real estate. And for first time home buyers and things like that. It was not with the intention of being a podcast star or a YouTube sensation or an Instagram influencer. It was strictly
tempting though, isn't it?
It is, but I think that's where people go wrong. Because I think if you're a real estate agent, at least for real estate agents, your goal is to do more business in real estate. But if you somehow get lost in I want my videos to go viral, I want my podcast to be the best produced, and you're going to start to find ways not to move forward with something. You're going to get in your own way. And I've seen that happen so many times. The reason why I've seen that happen so many times is because once our podcast became successful, I put that in air quotes because what does that really mean? To me, it meant was having clients able to do business with us very, very easily without doubting who we were. Like people would come in to meet with us and they'd say, I already watched your podcast. I know exactly what you're going to say. I know who you guys are. I'm sold. I want to work with you. And making that sale that much easier really catapulted our business. So we went from being number 7.
It shortens the sales cycle because it bridges the trust. It bridges the trust gap. I tell people when I started my first corporate finance boutique investment bank in Ottawa. By the way, we have an international audience, so I'm apologizing right now for the Canadian focused conversation here, dropping the names of neighborhoods and obscure little capital cities. But I moved from Toronto to Ottawa in 94 and I started doing corporate finance deals, VC deals, venture capital deals for high-tech companies, for everything. But Ottawa was a high-tech hotspot back in the day. Maybe it still is, I have no idea. But back in the day it was. And we probably did 80 transactions in 2 years plus and grew the business fairly substantially. And so there used to be in Ottawa a newspaper called the Ottawa Business Journal, and it was published once a month, and it was free. And the tech executives, they used to, it was going to come out the third Thursday. I'm just making that up, and it would be in the letter box, in the newspaper box. I know in your generation you're going, what the hell's that? But it used to be in the newspaper. Yeah. And people would line up, like they'd line up in the lobby of the bank or wherever it was, like picking up their OBJ. And so I learned that if you committed to 12, to a year of advertising, it was way cheaper than if I was going to put one ad, right? And that's the way of buying media. You want to buy it on a forward contract. And so I committed to 12 ads, 12 issues. It's a monthly journal. And I would put in what's called in the financial world a tombstone. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but it announces a transaction, right? Yeah. And so XYZ bought ABC and Scott was the advisor on it, that kind of thing, right? But then I would put no financial tombstone ever has a header on it. So I would put a header that was results, not promises. And then it would have the announcement, right? And so I did that for a couple of years, and people would say to me, they're really distinctive ads, and they would notice them when they say to me, did anybody ever call you? Do those ads work? So nope, not once did anybody ever phone me from one of those ads. And I didn't expect them to. But countless times I would be asked to go to a meeting for whatever reason through my network or whatever else I was doing. And I would sit down with the chairman or CEO of this tech company, and they would pull out of their desk drawer, every one of those ads had been cut out and were in a stack, right? Yeah. And it did exactly what you said. It bridged the credibility gap. Like, who the hell is this guy? He's not Ernst & Young, right? He's not Canaccord, right? And so it would bridge that gap. And then later in the 90s and 2000s, I moved into blogging. So I would write article. I turned my website of that company before I sold it into just a blog. And I like to write, and I'm a professional. And so I have that sort of bent to me. And so I would write, and then it was the exact same thing. New people that I would meet, new prospects would quote to me from things that I wrote on the blog. Right?
Isn't that so interesting? You don't even think anyone's paying attention. And all of a sudden they're quoting you, right?
Right. And then 3 years ago, I'm making that up, 2-3 years ago, something, I lose track of time. I travel, I'm on 4 or 5 planes a week, and I'm traveling here and there. I always have my headphones in, and I listen to podcasts. And I'm like, this is cool. I want to check that out. So we started a YouTube show called Martinis with Scott. And the idea is I'd sit around and have martini with my buddies, and people would listen in, right? Yeah. The concept was, what do we talk about when we're sitting at the bar at Prompton, which is a bar in downtown Toronto. And so we started that. We tried to do live streaming, and, the trials and tribulations, like we started on Periscope, for example. What a disaster that was. And then I'd have a guest in, and we'd talk for an hour and a half, and it was terrific. And I'd capture 6 minutes of the audio before the whole thing crashed, and we didn't know it. And right, it was just, all these stories. And so, but the point is, now I get the same thing from the podcasts. Right now, I get the same thing. I meet somebody new. They didn't call me from this, although I have had a little bit of that with this medium now. But it shortens that sales cycle. It's just brand building, and it's all just an evolution of the same story.
Yeah, it's funny because not all content has to be the same. It doesn't have to be video, as you mentioned. You started with a blog, and I think if that's your skill set, go down the blog path. Like, you don't have to be a podcast host or a YouTube star. I think you just need to look at it like you're top of the funnel for brand recognition. And once you build a solid base there, then you don't really ever have to sell. And the good news for me is I'm not like a born natural salesperson. So for me, I prefer to work on the brand stuff up front and then let the sale happen a little bit more easily without as much friction. And so it's funny because in us kind of going down this path and creating the podcast, and then what we would do, we would take snippets from the podcast and put those out on social media. And that kind of really grew awareness around it. We had a lot of agents come up to us and say, I'd love to be doing what you're doing. Can you guys teach me the ropes? And we were like, sure. There's, my business partner and I kind of come from that school of thought that there's more than enough to go around.
Sure.
And if not, like, we'll figure out new ways of doing business. So we would give out all the information. We'd say, this is who you need to hire on your team. Because Lord knows you can't hire me because I was awful at it. But this is who you need to hire. This is how you get people as guests on your podcast. This is who you need to reach out to. This is what you're going to do with the recording. We gave them the play-by-play. And then 3 months later, we would talk to people and say, how's the content going? I haven't really seen anything. And they would say, I haven't done anything. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know who to get. I want my podcast to be really good. So I need to buy all this equipment, and I want the video to be great. And I feel like I need to lose 5 pounds. Whatever the excuses were, they got in their own way. And eventually we just said, well, maybe there's an opportunity.
I need all of those things, by the way.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's so funny because what I've learned through this process is now that we've decided like, well, maybe we can help people kind of get out of their own way, is that no matter what age you are, what background you come from, what your education level is, everybody has their own insecurity. And it might not even be rational to the outside person, but everyone is dealing with something, whether they think, I don't like my voice, I can't write, I don't have the right clothes, I don't have the right lighting, or whatever it is. They'll get in their own way and preventing them from doing it. And I think the most important thing that you made mention of, Scott, is that what I learned by just simply doing it is why it got better. So the quality came out of the quantity. And most people think, well, I want a quality product. But if you only do one podcast every 6 months, because it takes you that long to edit it and make sure the lighting's right, where you feel like you look good that day or the right guest, you're not going to get enough reps in. Doing 2 podcasts a year is not going to do it. You got to be doing it like every single week religiously, regardless if it's good or if it's bad. And I always say to people when they're starting is no one's paying attention to you anyways. Why? Because you're not a podcast superstar. You're not a YouTube sensation. So it's probably just like your close-knit friends who are tuning into you anyways. And they're doing it to cheer you on. They're not doing it to go in and judge you. Maybe ask them for some feedback. Say, guys, can you watch this? I really want to improve. Know that like your thing's not going viral the first day you do it. So put it out there, put the content out, get the feedback, and then pivot and change as you go along.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult journey for sure. All of those hurdles that you have to go through. I don't know when we're releasing this particular show. It'll be in the upcoming weeks. I'm actually doing 5 of these, in the last 7 days, I think. So it's a little bang. But we released quantity. Sorry, what was that?
I said quantity. You're doing it back to back.
Well, so we've rebranded to the Winning Momentum podcast, and I don't know, 4 episodes ago or what have you. And I'm trying to do one guest 1 week, solo the next week, because I like to get more in depth into the technical side of things, and then alternate back and forth. But the bottom line is, this morning was we released episode 190. So it's coming along. There's been a lot of content. Thank you. Been a lot of content out there, but to your point, I mean, you just like, I can't stand listening to myself, right? And I think everybody has that problem. Like, you can't go critique your own work. I can't, anyways. And I've never heard of anybody being able to do that. And it's never going to be right. It's just never going to be right. And I'm still terrible at it. But I've come a long way for sure. For someone who was just curious, I didn't have any motivation, or that's not the right word. I didn't have any agenda or objectives from this journey, but my God, have I learned a lot. And I've become a better professional because I now have some insight into these insecurities and hangups that people have, and not necessarily because I'm intuitive or because I felt them myself, which I'm sure I do, but because I've been listening to other people's content, and it always kind of freaking out how fluffy it was. Because what I learned from my peer group is you're invited to speak on a panel or on something on a technical topic at whatever association in Vegas, or a lunch and learn on Bay Street. And what I never realized my whole life is that whole premise is I'm going to pick an arcane topic that no one cares about. I'm going to impress my peers with how smart I am. And that's exactly what that is. And it's really a painful learning curve. It took me 2 years to realize, like, nobody gives a shit about that. Right?
Well, no one gives a shit about most things. Everyone's worried about the bullshit.
Exactly. Like, who knew? And so, so it took me a long time to figure that out. One of my COVID missions, really April 2020, sort of right away, sitting at home on my mountaintop out here in BC, and I thought, well, I'm going to explore what the hell this personal branding thing is. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of brand builders in the U.S. And
no, I haven't.
Rory Vaden and
I should look into
Nashville. You should. Yeah, they're terrific. I mean, they're a factory, but they've been good to me.
Yeah.
And I started down this path. And the first thing that really struck me is I had, an advisor, a personal branding consultant that I'm working with on Zoom for 16 hours or whatever. And this person was amazing and terrific, but she had no idea what I was talking about. Like, right? I'm dropping my acronyms and my lingo from my industry. And it's just like, nobody knows what that is, which just blew my mind. And then I got onto Clubhouse when we were all on a Clubhouse run there for 3 months.
Yes. I was a part of that.
Totally, right? And we were doing live podcasts on Clubhouse, and we were running rooms, and it helped me so much just understand what people are really thinking, because I got to participate in the conversation. The audience gets to participate in the conversation on that forum. Anyways, I think that whole experience, not only has it created brand and shortened the sales cycle, but it's personally taught me a lot about entrepreneurs and owner managers and the stresses and the hang-ups about just getting out of bed and getting started. You just have to start.
Well, don't you think it's interesting when you start to focus on something like a podcast? All of a sudden you have a different ear when you're listening. Like, you're not listening necessarily just to be entertained anymore. You're listening with like more of a creative eye or creative ear on how you can get better. And I also think it brings out the point of branding, because it makes you realize like who the types of hosts you want to be like and who you don't want to be like. And you start to dig deep into that a little bit and say, well, who am I and who do I want my brand to speak about? One of the biggest things I took away from my MBA was this one course where we did a project that was called Me Inc. And the whole project was about, now this is back in 2014 when no one was really talking about personal brand. So this seemed, cutting edge at the time, but now obviously it seems a little redundant. But at the time I remember thinking like, oh, me as a brand, like it's not just about Kim Kardashian and I don't know, J-Lo, like, and how they use their personal brand to sell other things. It's like the regular person down the street can utilize all these same tools, social media, podcasting, YouTube, to build brand and to build business. And sometimes people say, well, Laura, I'm not a real estate agent, I'm not a salesperson. What would be my objective of creating content? And I always say, you never know where the world can take you. I started creating content on social media without a real objective, and then it turned into this business that I have now. So you just really never know. And as long as you're talking about something that you're passionate about, it's going to connect you with certain people who have the same likes. And all of a sudden you become the authority in whatever that is. So if your listeners are not in the real estate realm, like, I don't want to discourage you too from creating content around things that you're passionate about, around things that you like, because doors can open and you might find yourself in a brand new career doing something that you actually love to do versus, your regular 9-to-5 job, perhaps that's not giving you a lot of personal fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, the first rule of persuasion, even if you don't know what you want to persuade on, is attention. right? And there's lots of ways to do that, but I think this type of content is the easiest way with today's technology to
Well,
get
and
your
it's
name
relatively
out
cheap.
there.
It doesn't really cost that much.
Unless you do it like I do it, then it's
Yes.
not cheap.
Yes, that's true. But
So
you know what? I always tell people you grow into that. You grow into it. You can just take your phone out and start producing content today for free on any social media, right?
I did skip that step. But
you went straight in. I appreciate that too.
Yeah. What's your podcast name?
So we have, so I help produce 2 podcasts. One of them's called the Jazz Tackar podcast, or JTP. And then the other one is actually for my media company. It's called the FTGU Media Show. And on that podcast, they're 10-minute snippets where we're simply helping educate people on how to produce content for free. We're giving all the education away with the hope that we're going to find our people who are like, you know what, I'm ready to take this on to the next step. I've been doing it by myself for a couple years. Maybe I want to use your services, or just to bring awareness to the industry as a whole. The Jazz Tackar podcast, on the other hand, is more entrepreneurial, leadership, mindset kind of stuff. Like those are like hour and a half long shows that I've been a part of. I've co-hosted with him for a while, and we've had some amazing guests on those shows because
that's where I was heading, because I saw 2 names dropped, Cardone and Gary Vee.
Yes.
On those podcasts, right?
Yeah, we've had them, Bob Proctor, who just passed recently, unfortunately. We had Ryan Serhant. So if you're a fan of $1 Million Listing, Ryan Serhant, Josh Altman, Tracy Tudor, the list goes on. And it's amazing to hear from people like that. And like I think you were mentioning earlier, you know, when you get to hear from these amazing people who are really at the top of their industries and their game, what they have to say about business or what they have to say about mindset, you start to piece together and formulate, like there's things that people have in common. Successful people tend to they leave clues, right? There's a lot that they have in common. And so we've got to learn from some of the best. And it's been what did you learn
from what did you learn from Cardone? I'm going to ask about Cardone and then Gary Vee.
Well, we're getting nitty gritty. Grant Cardone's interesting to me. So he's loved by some and not loved by others. I think what's so interesting about him is that he is unapologetically himself. He says it like it is, according to him. And I think that there's something really fascinating there. Gary Vee, on the other hand, has a completely different approach. He's much more into soft skills, empathy. He preaches a lot about, you know, being a leader and what that looks like, and not having people who are working for you, but you're working.
I don't know if I go back and forth on that with Gary Vee. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, Grant Cardone is a real estate syndicator. At the end of the day, it's Cardone Capital, and he's running around and he's buying lots of multi-unit residential buildings, predominantly in the U.S., has a huge following on social media, runs coaching and sales sessions for a fee, but it's all a funnel to drive people to spend $1,000 or $100,000 in a syndicated unit to invest in the real estate. And his entire premise is that you could go buy a single unit residential building, but then you can't afford to do the property management and you're at risk. And he has some logic behind that that's not logical at all, but you're better off having 50 units, and you can do that, but you can't afford to do that, so you do it through syndication. That's basically his pitch. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. 10xing your life, right?
Say it again.
10xing your life. He's always preaching.
And then 10xing, which is basically be way more aggressive in your thinking than you already are. And then Gary Vee, on the other hand, runs a global media company. Gary Vaynerchuk is his name. His icon in the digital world is Gary Vee. But he's a tech investor. He runs a global media company. He's written many, many books, as has Grant, all of which are super successful. And he's about content. But the reason I jumped in on this is he's an operator. He actually has real skills at operating and managing a business. But he doesn't talk about that because that's not what a broad audience wants to hear. They want to hear about the soft skills, how to overcome their fear, how empathy is applicable in running a business.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there's a lot of speaking to the audience in his content, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, and you know what, and it is resonating with people. It's funny because I do find people are quite polarized on the Grant. Like if we were comparing them, it's not, you don't generally get a lot of people who love both because they are quite different.
The polarization on Grant is that he's flying on private jets on your dime.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
and that rubs some people the wrong way.
take it or leave it, but he doesn't hide it.
No,
like, I don't really
true.
get.
That's true.
I don't get what the problem is.
You
You didn't have to write him the check,
right? Now, here's the thing. So Grant Cardone, we met like virtually, and I obviously spoke with his team quite a bit. But with Gary Vee, I actually had the opportunity of going to his office, meeting him, and then we had the fortune of staying at the office for a couple hours afterwards. And he gave us access to his media team, and they taught us about how they would take a podcast like this and chop it up into multiple pieces of content. They talked to us about how they, get footage from 2017 and compare it to footage today. So Gary can be shown saying the same thing. And so we actually adopted a lot of those same principles here at our company so that we were, working a little bit smarter, not harder per se. Because if you're taking the time to do an hour podcast, you may as well chop that up and get some content versus shooting additional content for it. And so the team was just so helpful. I had such an incredible experience there, and I'm sure Grant's team is amazing as well. But it's just that was just a completely different experience.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about Grant is he's hyper focused on selling you something, and I mean that's blatantly the point of the whole deal. I made the mistake of providing my email to on one of his forms. Yeah. Oh my God. It was like 18 times a day. I had this fellow from Vancouver emailing and calling and telling him to get lost. Like they're very aggressive with that stuff. And God bless him. I'm not saying that as a negative thing because he doesn't hide it. Right? Yeah. That's what it's all about. So here's why I wanted to ask you about this is part of the reason I do what I do is a pushback on the Gary Vee content because I listen to him a lot and I respect him. And here's some stats you might not know. If you launch a new business, 90% of those businesses will never, ever, 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 ever pay their founder a living wage. 90% never pay a living wage to the founder. And of the ones that do, 80% of those never create any wealth for their founder. So there might be a paycheck, right? You can feed your family and buy a home, and get your kids through college, but you're not selling for the exit, right? So 2% of new businesses actually create any wealth at all. Those are the stats of all new businesses. And I fear in this new world that we're pushing younger generations into entrepreneurship. It's better than having a job. Everybody can be number one. Everybody can be free. Everybody can follow their passion. But the stats are the stats, right? The stats
Those people are not going to be successful. Yeah.
You're not going to be successful, right? And so, and I think that I'm not at all picking on Gary Vee. I have tremendous respect and love his content and I consume it. But I don't know that message comes through. I don't know that people that follow that sort of content are getting the straight goods on, and you can't just content your way out of that problem.
Yeah.
Right. You can build the brand all you want. And so what I try to do is provide some substance in running a business when things aren't going well, right? How do I become a better leader? How do I have a better mindset? What are the technical, financial, and other skills required to run a business? I try to provide that because my hope is you don't have to pay me bucket loads of cash to improve those stats a little bit, right? If you're an entrepreneur or an owner manager. So all of that to say that I focus on those skills, but I do not focus on what you do, which is why I was happy to have you on, because at the end of the day, even if I'm working in a turnaround, I don't worry about growing revenue. I don't worry about building brand. I worry about surviving today and moving to tomorrow. But 6 months from now, when things are stable, you need to turn your mind to how do I grow this business? And right.
I've only been, it's funny because I've only, like on the real estate side, I've been doing that for so many more years, but the media side, I'm in a completely different role. We've only been, that company started less than 10 months ago. And so I'm in startup mode in one company while the other company is kind of humming along, and how you deal with problems in each company is different. And, you know, it's hard to get out the tactical information about how do I actually deal with problems every day at work? Because they're nonstop. There's so many lessons I've learned. There's so many mistakes that we've made in this startup. That, you know, we thought maybe we could use the brand from our real estate side and kind of propel us forward. And we said, you know what, it's not working that way. Like, we have to go back to basics. And I think people do forget that. I think that's very, very important. Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. Entrepreneurship is I think, you know, blown out of proportion a little bit these days, where that's the be all end all. I think if you're a great, like me personally, I had already mentioned to you, like, I'm not the best salesperson, and I'm probably not the best CEO that's ever existed, right? You got to know where your skill set is, and try to just carve out like a little niche for yourself. But no, like, there's a lot. It's hard. It's sleepless nights. It's a lot of worry. It's disappointing people. I've disappointed a lot of people the last 10 years, whether it be family because I'm not home enough, or people in the office because I'm not paying them enough, but I don't have income, so I can't pay them more even if I wanted to. There's all those problems that as an employee, I think you don't see. And you think it looks easy. It looks like managing people is great. I just want to manage and I don't want to do the work. It's not that at all. And so I think kudos to you for trying to get that information out to the world for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. What is a personal brand, and how is it relevant to an entrepreneur, or even someone like me who's been in business, 30 years and woke up one morning and decided to start doing podcasts and hire a personal branding? Let's define it for the audience.
For me, personal brand is simply what people say about you when you're not in the room. So it's really just your reputation, right? And I hate to break it down to be that simple, but that's really what it is. And so I always say to people, you already have a personal brand. You just might not have thought too hard about it.
It's your reputation.
It's your reputation. And if you don't like what people are saying about you, maybe it's time to reformulate what it is you're doing and putting out to the world that people are not connecting and driving with. The beauty, I think, of having a personal brand when you're a small business owner, or you're looking to change maybe careers, is that's really your ability to connect with people. It's hard for Pepsi, for example, to really, really connect with people. They can have good commercials that make people feel something, but when you message Pepsi on Instagram, who's talking back to you? And what's the voice that's being said? It has to be very corporate talk. It has to have a certain feel. Everyone has to sound the same. Where a personal brand, you can really, really think more about growing relationships and having real opinions. And then using that kind of brand recognition to help propel different areas of your life. So whether it be you have multiple businesses like me, and I want people to either come over to here to the real estate side and do something with me, or I'm hoping to get people to come over to the media side and do something. I also talk a lot about fashion in my personal branding. Who knows? Maybe I'll get some fashion deal one day, and that'll be super fun for me. And so I think it really gives people an inside look at who you really are.
Interesting.
Build better relationships.
So one thing that I think owner managers, entrepreneurs, business owners struggle with is this: when it comes to personal branding, is the distinction between the personal brand and the corporate brand. Do I need both? Which one do I focus on? How do they interact? And listening to what you just said, it's occurred to me in the last week, watching this Disney fiasco with their brand, whether big corporate America in particular is trying to do things with a corporate brand that might be better done with a personal brand.
I think that's very, very good insight. I think a corporate brand, like there's so much riding. And now Disney's massive, right? So if you have a smaller business, it might not be the same. But and I went through this problem because on the real estate side, when I helped the owner on that side work on his personal brand, we started posting everything on the company profile page. But then all of a sudden, the company profile page started to look an awful lot like a personal page. Exactly. And the personal page was looking a lot like a corporate page. And so, we really kind of sat and said, like, let's really plan this out. What does my company stand for? What's the vibe? What's the look? What's the feel? What are they?
And what should they not stand for? Like, what should we just stay out of?
Even more important, and what should they not say? And so now it's like, okay, our real estate company talks about real estate. The real estate company is not focused on mindset and leadership. It's focused on real estate. You as the personal brand, though, can go and talk about all of your other passions. And I think it's really important to separate the two. I work with real estate agents again. And so I think where they kind of go wrong is they feel they need a real estate page where they're wearing a suit and tie, and then they're just showing they're just listed and just sold, and then a separate page for their, like, where they actually showcase their dog and them playing sports. And I'm like, no, as a real estate brand, because you are your brand in real estate, unless you're talking about an actual brokerage, your brokerage should have its own page, but you personally are connecting with people on a personal level. I would keep it to one page where you're talking about real estate, maybe 60% of the time. And then 40% of the time, you're talking about the other things in your life that you're passionate about. Maybe it's you showcase yourself cooking or gardening.
But when you're a real estate agent, which in my mind is entrepreneurial, right? Mm-hmm. You're out trying to sell and make commission, and it's eat what you kill for the most part. Plus the house is giving you a bunch of listings. But the corporate brand is not your brand if you're an agent. Correct. And if you're in the right place, if you're at Royal LePage, the corporate brand is strong, right? Yeah. And so how do you sell more? What do you have to do? Well, you have to, I don't mean just real estate, I mean anything. You have to have great product. The prospective purchaser needs to feel comfort with you, and the prospective purchaser needs to feel comfort with the company that you're representing, that they're doing business with. All three of those things, and both on a logical and emotional level. Okay, so there's 6 paradigms, there are 6 metrics, 3 times 2. And if you're a real estate agent at Royal LePage, well, you don't have to worry too much about the corporate one. You've got that covered, and you don't have to worry too much about the product. It's a house or it's a unit. I mean, the product is a commodity in that industry. And so what do you have to worry about? Well, you have to worry about you. And to me, that's the personal brand. But I think that if you're in my business and you're up against, I don't know, whoever, Ernst & Young or Canaccord, I've dropped those names before, so I'll repeat them. Well, I need to do both. I need to have a corporate brand and a personal brand by my logical analysis.
Yeah, I 100% agree to you. And sorry, I might have not made that clear. So the media company, they have its own brand, and it doesn't look and sound like me. I can tell you that. Like we thought about what we wanted that brand to be. It's not just Laura with a logo all of a sudden on it. It has a completely different look and feel. It speaks about certain things and not about certain things, and stands for certain things and not certain things. So it is important to have certain awareness depending on the industry you're in, right? And sometimes like you really have to focus on, can I do both? And can I do both well? And where am I going to get the best ROI? So if you're brand new, you might think, look, for me to come up with a content strategy for my business page when I don't even have one for my personal page, I would say focus on one and then kind of grow it out slowly. You're going to find over time, there's going to be efficiencies and things that you learn to allow yourself to really focus on both brands separately. But I think just, writing it down on a piece of paper, like putting a line down the middle, like what's my company saying and what do I say? Right. Just really helps like focus their attention in.
Right. So the message that I have, it sounds like you're agreeing for, again, entrepreneurs, business owners, someone who wants to refocus on their brand. You have to think about, do I have a corporate brand? And if not, I need one, because purchasers need to know who they're doing business with as a company. And then their personal brand is to so that when you're dealing one-on-one with somebody or doing a presentation, they know who you are, as we've talked about a lot during this. So you need to do both, and content might be the answer to both, right? But different
Well,
content.
I certainly think it helps. When you go to a listing presentation, for example, and you're spending about an hour at someone's house, yeah, you can talk about the comps and maybe you get the listing because you cut your commission or something like that. But generally speaking, the seller picks who they feel the most comfortable with, who they resonate with, who they connect with. And you can do that in a listing presentation by saying, oh my gosh, I love these hydrangeas. And then you have a long conversation about gardening and you build that rapport. The beauty with social media and using content is that you can just do that on a mass scale. So it's not going to take you as many appointments to build that. And so that when you already show up to those appointments, you're ready to go, as we were mentioning at the start. And so I think content is just a really cheap way, right? Like real estate agents notoriously have spent a lot of money putting billboards up and being on bus stops. And I think it still has a place because I think more awareness is just better. But you also have to consider that most people now, they have their face in their phones at the bus stop. They're not necessarily paying as much attention. Right. And so it's important to be where their attention is.
Yeah. And it's all about that attention, as we said before. Laura, how does someone new who's going down this personal brand journey, or they want to start, how do you define personal brand? How do you get started? How do you know what you want to talk about?
So again, I'm taking it back to simple pen and paper. I want you to write your name in a circle, okay? And then just start rhyming things off that you like, things that you're passionate about. What do you do on your spare time? Are you a movie buff? Do you like are you into comics? Just kind of getting an overall sense of who you are and then looking at it and saying, okay, does it make sense for me to talk about 100 things? Probably not. And the reason being is because if you start to stand for too many things, you kind of stand for nothing. And so just really kind of group them into things like, do I like sports? Do I like cooking? Like, what are some of my hobbies? And then think, okay, these are things that I'm going to start talking about. And it doesn't have to be like a physical thing, like a hobby. It could be like, you know what? I love talking about meditation. Right. And like, I love mindset stuff. You can talk about that and you can talk about it through your content, either separate from what you do as your business or find a way to kind of marry the two. And I think it's just important to go through that exercise. And if you can't think of it yourself, call up your friends and say like, look, if you had to define me in 3 different ways, what would you say about me? Maybe they say you're the funny one. Okay, great. I'm the funny one. What should I do then? Can I make content that showcases my humor about the industry I'm in? I see a lot of realtors who do this very, very well, where they're the funny guy. That's what they're known for. And they incorporate that into their content. And so instead of just giving educational content, they're giving like the education with a bit of entertainment. And that's, I think when you can marry, I call it edutainment, education and entertainment together, that's where you're really going to win.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly why
if you're not the funny guy and all of a sudden you try to make jokes, like it's just not going to work. So just be true to who you are and you're going to find the people who resonate with you. I think where people get concerned is that they're going to start repelling people. Like if I start talking about sports and this potential seller,
they take themselves too seriously, right? They take themselves way too, like I'm a serious real estate agent. I can't talk about whatever.
Yeah.
Cigars.
And I'm like, but if I went to the bar with you, would you talk about other things or would we just talk about real estate and you'd be in your suit and like tie and like,
exactly.
And it's like, no, you would build a relationship with me. We would find common ground. I think people have to get used to the idea of principles of plenty. Like you might lose some people because of the content. Maybe you swear one day in your content and someone says, I will never do business with this person because they said the F word. But guess what? That's okay. There's plenty of people who would be like, I love this agent because they seem authentic. They seem true.
They're authentic.
And you're going to find your tribe. And I think you just have to realize that there's more than enough business to go around. If you, you love dogs and all you ever talk about is dogs, and then you only do business with people who love dogs, well, great. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'd rather go shopping for homes with people where we can actually talk in the car about something versus those awkward conversations to showings where you're like, oh my God, what am I going to talk to this person about? Because we have nothing in common. I'd rather find the people that I want. And it's about sorting. And when you sort, you're going to find you're probably enjoying it a lot more.
Do you coach people in that space as they're starting out to, break their content into pillars or chapters, so to speak? And that was the biggest thing I learned. The reason I paid all this money to this branding group is because I thought to myself, well, there has to be a formula for this. Like, instead of me just flailing around for 5 years trying to figure it out myself, I'm just going to pay somebody to tell me what the formula is. And my big aha moment, my revelation, is like, in my head, pretend you're writing a book and pretend there's 8 chapters or 9 chapters or whatever. What are those? And those become what they call it, or what you call it, but they call it their pillars and your content within that. And not that you wouldn't talk about martinis and cigars, but you try to just come back to those same points, those same pillars over and over.
Yeah,
that was really helpful to me.
As methodically as that, I'm a little bit more like natural and easygoing about it. So only because what I find people do, and it's human nature, right? Like, we want the formula. I want to lose 50 pounds. What's the formula? The formula is so simple. Just consume less than you expend, and you're going to lose weight. But we want to know, like, how much exercise, what type of exercise. And we get so lost in the details in something that we never really get started because it can become overwhelming. So I just encourage people to say, like, try something, talk about something, see if you get some feedback on it. If the feedback's awful day one, don't just give up, try it again, because maybe someone didn't see it yet who did resonate. And then over time, you're going to start seeing patterns, and you're going to start seeing what people connect with you on. Not everyone's going to take you seriously as a mindset person because you've sold 5 properties. Like, they're going to say, well, you don't, like, why should I listen to you? But if you keep talking about it, keep talking about it, and start showcasing some of your successes, and people are going to start taking you seriously. And so I just say, get going. Just get started, right. And then you're going to learn these things along the way. And so I try not to be too much in the formula about it, although I know that that's what people really want to hear. But sadly, when it comes to this, a lot of it is trial and error. Instagram, for example, changes their algorithm every other month. So for me to give you a specific formula on how to win there is probably not going to serve you well when this podcast gets released a month from now. And exactly. So it's just get out there, keep trying, hit your head against the wall and see what works. And unfortunately, that's not sexy sounding. I get it, but it's what's worked for me, and it's what I'm seeing work for all of our agents who are our clients.
I think that's great advice. Look, we're heading towards the end of an hour here. You and I were afraid we'd have 5 minutes to talk about at the beginning of this, and I haven't even gone through half my notes yet. But I just, as a summary, I want to reinforce for the audience that the last show that I released with a guest, a very good friend of mine, one of the top lawyers in Canada, a world-recognized lawyer, and every time I have been a huge supporter of me and the show and my company forever, and every time I have him on, he makes this little side comment to me. He says, "I don't know if anybody will ever call me from this, but I like to help." And I said, "I can answer that. No one will call you from this. That's not what the point of this is." And it just drives me nuts that people don't understand the difference between building that brand, which means shortening the sales cycle, as you and I talked about 45 minutes ago, is an entirely different thing than prospecting and closing deals. It's not related. But if you don't have the brand, which means people like and connect with you and trust the company that you work with, you're not going to sell your product very easily to the people that you're prospecting. And so you need to be both. You need to do both as a business owner. Do you want to just sort of summarize on that?
Yeah, people often think sales and marketing are under the same umbrella. And as you mentioned, they are very, very different, and the skill set required is different. And some people are good at both, and some people are better at one than the other. Ultimately, I believe you double down on your strengths. So if you're great at sales, like you're winning, then focus on that. Like, who am I to tell you to change everything? Where I do think people can win with the content is for people who are not necessarily the best closers, the people who are not necessarily willing to walk out on the street and tap anyone on the shoulder and try to sell their product. And so they need a reason to talk to people. They need a reason to connect with people. And I think the content allows you to say, like, hey, have you seen this? Can you give me some of your feedback? And just by asking people to give you your feedback, now you have a viewer. They might not buy your product tomorrow, but if they continuously are listening to you and giving you feedback, they feel part of your journey. They feel connected to you. And usually that can result in a deal down the road. And so you really have to think of the timeline for brand building as being much, much, much longer than your time.
Forever.
It's forever. It's forever. And you made a good point. It's both. You do marketing and sales, right?
Exactly.
You don't have to pick just one. It's about doing your branding for your company and doing your branding for yourself. And that's how you're really going to win. And so I think people always get a little bit lost in I have to pick a side. It's about doing both.
Laura, this show is about winning momentum. And the reason for that is if people are struggling in their business, if people are struggling in their life, which everybody does. I've given you the stats. I talk about it on this show all the time. You get into trouble and you're not sure what to do about it. Mm-hmm. And a big thing comes up in turnarounds when you're dealing with troubled companies and turnarounds. You think to yourself, well, when is a turnaround over? When is a crisis over? Like, what does success mean? How do I define that? Right. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's about momentum. To me, that's everything in life. When I wake up this morning, are things going to be a little bit better than they were yesterday? Right. That's positive momentum. Or are they going to be a little worse or the same as they were yesterday, which is, stagnation or negative momentum? And my experience in troubled companies is that if you could start making things a little bit better every day, if you get that momentum, you attract universal resources. You attract people. People are excited to be with a company that maybe it's crap, but it's getting better, right? They're attracted to that. Financial resources. People want to invest in those sorts of companies. And so that's why this show is called The Winning Momentum. And all of that to give you some context, because I'm going to ask you, as I do everybody, for Laura's top 3 tips or strategies to turn things around. And that could be in your business, in your life, and anything. How do you handle that?
I think for me, the first part of building momentum starts first thing in the morning. So I'm a big believer of getting up early. I get it. Not everyone's like that, but I get up at 5 a.m. and usually the night before I start my routine. So I have everything in its place so that when I get up, it's ready to go. I got my workout clothes over here. I got my water over here. And it's like, as soon as that alarm goes off, I'm already up and running. And that to me just puts me in the right mindset for the rest of the day, which I think is really important. And so you got to just figure out what your routine is. What's the best way for you to get started to put yourself in already that winning mindset? So once I've done my workout, I'm like, I have the hardest part of my day behind me, right? And it's 6 a.m. Most people aren't even awake yet. And so I think that's really, really important. I would say the second thing is, and you kind of made mention to this, but I think it's really important to look at building habits. Right? Like what are the basics? So I have an undergraduate degree in nutrition, which is why I was mentioning that before about it's pretty simple to lose weight. Us as humans actually make it very difficult. I think it's simple to win in life, but we try to overcomplicate it. And so it's like, are you getting to work before everybody else? Do you have a plan? Are you leading the team well? Do you care about your employees? Those are all just little tiny habits, and no one of them really is going to be a deal breaker. But when you start to add them up over time, that's when you start to see a lot of change. And I guess I would say the last one would be to surround yourself with like-minded people. Surround yourself with people who believe what you believe or have the same goals as you, not because you want yes people. I'm definitely not saying that, but I think when you're surrounding yourself with people who have that same kind of zest for what you're doing, you're just going to win, because you're going to start to find like, hey, this is a lot of fun. I only take Saturdays off now. So I work 6 days a week, and on Saturday, by the time the end of the day is up, I'm ready to get back to work. I love the people I work with. I love what I do. And I hope that for everybody else. So I think you just got to find that team. You got to find people who love it too.
Amazing. I would, in my words, your first 2 points, which were having everything ready to go in the morning and getting the hard part behind you early, and habits. To me, I would express those as systems over goals, which is something I talk about all the time, right? And you talk about diet and losing weight. Well, it's, a goal of losing 5 pounds this month or 20 pounds this year is it's a completely useless objective. Your goal ought to be the system to get there. Here's what I'm going to eat. Here's what I'm going to eat. Here's the exercise I'm going to do. And you create a system that you can adhere to. And then you find some success with that, and you break through. Habits are everything, right? You break through your confirmation bias, the way that you think about that yourself, the way that you think about your business. And then your last point really, to me, boils down to surrounding yourself with great people, boils down to positivity, which I think is everything. And that's part of my morning routine, is reminding myself to be positive. Which is hard. It's hard when you're dealing with troubled businesses all the time.
It 100% is. I do find there are moments, like I'm not perfect, I'm human, where I struggle. I try to decrease the amount of time that I spend in the struggle, personally or at work. It's how fast can you get back up, right? And I'm working on it. I'm building the habit. It probably used to take me a day and a half when something really bad happened to get over it. Now I got it down to kind of a couple hours. I'm sure some people
2 hours. 2 hours is the answer. You need to pick, if you're in a shitstorm, you need to pick 2 hours a day when you're most productive. Put your head down, deal with everything, and then for the next 6 to 10 hours, you do why you got into business to begin with. That's what you focus on, because the truth of the matter is, if you focus on the trouble for 8 or 10 hours a day, you're only doing it for 2 hours anyways. And then you're just worrying for the rest of the time. Right?
Yes, I've learned that the hard way. So that's a great point. I've learned that the hard way. And, I'm on my journey, and everyone is. And I think we just got to keep looking forward. You got to keep fighting. You got to keep finding positive people, even if a tiny little thing in your day went right, like focus on that. Like, look at your dog, if it's a dog, or your kid or your spouse, and just say, like, I'm so lucky to have this person or whatever it is in my life. You got to be grateful a little bit. And it usually helps.
Laura, how and why do people reach you?
How you can reach me, I would say probably the best way is to connect with me, like on Instagram. That's where I'm doing a lot of my content. I would love to get everyone's feedback, like I said. So connect with me there. If you have any tips or feedback from me, that's what I would love. Why you should do it? I don't know. Why not?
Well, how can you help people?
Sorry?
Apart from saying hello, because you're a personable person, what service can you provide to people? How can you help people?
Oh, I got you. Well, see, I'm so bad at sales. I don't even use my opportunity to sell at the end. My goodness, like it's just so not part of who I am. Yeah, at the end of the day, I would say most people who probably are listening to this show would be intrigued by the media company, so that you can follow them on FTGU Media on Instagram, and we help agents, mostly in salespeople, provide educational content to their consumers. So we help you provide all that content that we just talked about. So that would be the why, I suppose.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you for anything else you want to talk about before we go?
No, I think we covered it all today. I don't want to bore too much of your listeners. I hope it was valuable. I hope I brought 1 or 2 tips maybe to this conversation that you, Scott, haven't heard of yet, or that you thought was particularly interesting? And then, of course, your viewers, I hope they enjoyed it.
I did. I learned a lot. This is not my sweet spot, as I said. So I was apprehensive that I even knew what to ask. And so,
your questions are great, but hey, that's because you've done 190, I think you said, of these. So I'm not surprised.
I've never done one on personal branding ever. So you're my first.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
There you go. Hey, everybody, thank you for listening. We are on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, everywhere that you listen to podcasts. That's where we are. Also, you can go to thescottsinclair.com, thescottsinclair.com, a brand new website. It's almost functional. And if you register, I promise we're going to find your name, even though it doesn't notify me. And Ashley's fixing that. So we're going to have that good to go. Go check it out. All the content will be there on the blog. Please follow, subscribe, whatever you need to do. And again, thank you for listening. And Laura, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.